But to begin with today, it's our weekly roundup of Ontario and local politics. And it's been an interesting time. And I know that you figure, well, come on, it's the middle of the summer. What's going on at Queen's Park? Well, quite a bit, actually, because there'll be a throne speech early next week, and they are going to bring the legislature back for a few things. But in the meantime, there are some reports that have come out in the last little while that, well, let's frank, are probably somewhat embarrassing to the Ford government if you want to look at their election promises and their performance to date. To talk about all this stuff, we're pleased to welcome back to the program John Best, publisher of the Bay Observer. John, great to have you back with us. Thanks for joining us today.
Nice to be with you, Bill.
Let's talk first of all about government spending, which is there are two kinds of government spending, the kind that they promise when there's an election campaign and then the kind they actually follow through on. The Fraser Institute, which is a right-wing, small c conservative institution, of course, has done some number crunching on the Ford government. And apparently the Doug Ford government will outspend the Kathleen Wynne government this year, even when those figures are adjusted for inflation and COVID-19 expenditures. Is this another matter of, do as I say, not what I do?
Well, it may be a matter of, as we see so often, what looks easy to accomplish when you're running for office or when you're out of office, and then you actually get into harness and find out how difficult problems are. I think you could use the same analogy when you're talking about some of the promises you'll hear on the municipal side as well. But, I think we all know that Doug Ford's inclination, at least, would be to keep costs down. But, the same day or the same week that story's coming out, you have these very urgent news conferences from the medical community, particularly the nursing community, about raises. Scrap this bill that has pegged their salaries at 1%, and I think we'd all be surprised if there isn't some movement by the government on that front. We've got teachers lining up for their contract talks. Certainly money will be part of their discussion. And then you've got the non-teaching staff are looking for something like 11% in increases. Again, they're arguing that it's catch up from previous austerity. So I guess the real question, there's no question he's spending more money than the Wynne government did. He can't argue with the numbers, but I guess the question is, where do you make the savings? And that's always the challenge.
Well, and I guess even more importantly, because you've just, give us a long laundry list of things that are the demands that are going to be on this government. But when you look at this now in the report from the Fraser Institute, you got to ask yourself, where are they spending this? Because it's not going to healthcare. I mean, not only, have you got these nurses and teachers unions, et cetera, that are going to be complaining about this, but I know you saw the report earlier this week from the Ontario Financial Accountability Office that says that Ontario has the worst record in the country of healthcare spending per capita. And so, they're getting a lot of revenue. They are generating revenue in a whole lot of ways here, but it doesn't seem to be going to the places that we consider as priorities.
Well, it's, first of all, the size of government never shrinks. So it's, there's a huge payroll to be maintained. But I think the answer to your question is that if we understood it better, then we might be able to make better judgments about where cuts can be made. But the reality is nobody wants cuts. They'd like to see the government reduce its spending, but there's nobody lining up with their hand up saying, okay, you can cut us by a little bit. And there's certainly, in any government, there's going to be a certain amount of waste created just by lack of oversight. That's just, it doesn't matter what level of government you're in. But it's, we have a financial accounting office. We have an auditor general, and they're producing reports all the time about areas where they think money has been wasted, but here we are with a government that's ideologically inclined to be frugal, and yet they're wrestling with it. So I think what it tells you is that it's not easy running a government these days.
Well, what's that old thing? It's getting elected is easy, governing is difficult. But, I still remember the rhetoric about, when Ford was running against the Wynne government, of course. And let's face it, we know the, the circumstances then. Everybody was pretty ticked off with the Wynne government for a whole lot of reasons. But they went at them pretty hard, about overspending, just hiring all their friends, and the money was going to those sorts of projects, and there was nepotism, favoritism, I mean, all of those things. And they said, we will get a rein on this. John, when are we going to learn our lesson? Everybody who wants or aspires to govern tells us this, and then they get in there and they do the same thing. Within a couple of years. I mean, Stephen Harper said, enough of this liberal spending. He finally got elected, and we had 10 years of deficits after 10 years of surpluses. And it's happened before here too. Even the Harris government, for heaven's sakes, after, they defeated Bob Rae, he increased the provincial debt by incredible amounts of money. So, and I think it goes to your point. Maybe we should just smarten up a little bit and realize that, look at us, all the stuff they promised you here during the election campaign, the chances of all that happening are slim and none, really. We've got, as they said, not a revenue problem in this province. We have a spending problem, but it doesn't seem to matter who's in the corner office.
No, and there are both levels of, to some degree, not so much at the municipal level, but certainly at the federal and provincial level. The whole public relations machinery around both of those levels of government are about spending announcements. That's how they communicate with the public, is spending announcements. And so the public is conditioned to that. The media is conditioned to that. And, nobody gets up and makes an announcement about how we're going to save money, other than during an election. During an election debate, you might hear that. But we don't get announcements about departments that come in under budget. So, as long as we and the media, to some degree, go along with this announcementitis, if you will, I don't know how you change the dynamic. Every day you can go on the government website and you will see 75% of the announcements or more are related to spending announcements. So I think that's part of it. We've really got a culture now where we just expect to see a spending announcement every day, but we don't get any savings announcements. But if you look at it. Sorry, I was just going to say there was and I'm not encouraging this, but I did see an article on the weekend that suggested that maybe our focus on debt to GDP is wrong, and they cited Japan as an example of a country whose debt to GDP is like 250%. It's the highest in the world by a long shot, and their economy is working very well. By contrast, Ontario is somewhere around 42% debt to GDP, and Canada is about 89%. So just to put it in perspective, I'm not advocating, that we should continue to run up huge debts, but that was an interesting take. I think it was in the Globe on the weekend.
And nobody's got all the answers. We understand that. I mean, different governments, federal and provincial, have taken a stab at this over the last number of years, and I don't know that any of them got it right. Some of them have, some successes and some failures. And I get the fact that, there's going to be economic cycles too. And I know, because every time I've talked about the Harper government and the 10 years of deficits, first of all, they say, well, there was a recession. Well, yeah, we get that. But spending is they take those things into consideration when they do these estimates. And that was the nice thing. And I remember you and I having a discussion, I think at the time in 08, 09, when the recession started to really hit. And there were an awful lot of economists that were saying, boy, I still wish we had some of that cash left over from the government surpluses of bygone days. Fiscal responsibility is a pipe dream once you're in government, because, as you say, they're coming at you from every different angle. We know that, for instance, when these guys meet next week and they have the speech from the throne, and they're going to pass this budget that we just talked about, that the Fraser Institute has analyzed, and there's going to be spending scads of money, and it's a lot of it's going to be on highways and roads. It's not going to be on healthcare and education, and I think that's going to cause an awful lot of frustration for an awful lot of people.
One of the hidden costs we have in Ontario is the fact that the government is heavily subsidizing hydro. And I don't think there's many people in citizens that would say I would pay higher hydro bills, but that's getting to be a huge cost. All these announcements about, well, we're going to peg your hydro at such and such. It's all great news, but it's been a long time since the hydro bill covered the actual cost of producing and distributing electricity in Ontario. That's just one example. Stephen Lecce, I think you and I talked about, every time he speaks in front of the media, all he does is spew out numbers about how much money he's spending on whether it's hiring more staff or whether it's air conditioning, whatever. So, but that hydro cost, that's one that's going to bite us at some point if it isn't already.
And these are the things, as you say, they don't make the headlines. Usually it takes an auditor general or an accountability office to kind of bring these things to light. But the problem with that, of course, is to go back to that big word again about accountability and transparency. With the new way of handling this right now for government seems to be that they just deny it. They say, oh, those numbers aren't right. And that's what, as a matter of fact, that's what the premier said about the healthcare spending. Those are inaccurate numbers. Well, no, these guys are an independent body, but it just again plays to the political pandering that goes on, because the people that are supportive of the government are simply going to say, yeah, the premier's right. This is all. Well, I'm not going to use that term that Trump used to use all the time, but it's fictional, they think. And that's the way we rationalize things right now. So it's no wonder we're not finding consensus on an awful lot of stuff, because you're either for them or against them. And if you're against this guy, you're not going to believe anything. And we seem to be in that problem right now. But in the meantime, you've got all these groups that you just talked about, the nurses, and, you see that survey today. 50% of the nurses that were polled said that they're considering leaving their job. That's a crisis. And I'm not hearing a whole lot about it right now from the government.
It's a major crisis, and he spoke about it yesterday, and the headline was that he really didn't sound like he had an answer, and the truth is there may not be an answer. It's a serious problem, and it's not something that you're going to wave a magic wand at by any means. And then you have rhetoric, the government with its addiction to spending announcements. You have the flip side where, even though spending in any department, including health, even though we're spending more money this year than last year, you keep hearing it described as cuts. So there's voodoo economics, to use an old phrase, going on all over the place, and it's the public's not well served, and it's there just needs to be a more critical analysis of some of this. And unfortunately, in an instant media universe that we live in, it's not happening.
Well, I know we've only got a couple of minutes left here, but I guess I keep going back to transparency and accountability, for these government announcements. And we, I think, need to be a little more skeptical as voters, when some of these announcements come up about just where this money is going to be coming from. And how many times, John, have you covered a story about one of those, here's what we're going to spend, isn't this a great idea? And it's a re-announcement. It's money that was already allocated and already announced 6 months before that. They're playing the shell game here with the voters, and it's awfully frustrating when you try to uncover exactly what is going on.
Well, we used to talk about re-announcements, but now we get, probably 5 iterations of re-announcements when the program is first developed, and then each time money is allocated out of it, it's another announcement, another re-announcement. So, there's just 1984, people read that and thought, boy, that can't happen any place except Russia. But, the amount of disinformation, the kind of language we've developed around government now is really, we've kind of joined the club. It's very difficult to get anything other than BS out of any of these levels of government, but especially the 2 senior ones.
Well, and this goes back, I know we're out of time now, but this goes back to a discussion that you and I have had, and a lot of people in this country and south of the border have had so many different times too, is they hire an awful lot of people and pay them an awful lot of money to be able to spin all these stories to make their government look good. And on the other side, the other side of that microphone, The media in both countries has been decimated right now for a whole lot of reasons. So the chances of somebody actually taking the time to do the homework and spade work on this is diminishing rapidly, and it's awfully frustrating for those of us who are left in this job to try to find out exactly what is going on, which is why we rely on John Best and the Bay Observer, I guess, to give us the real story on these things. John, have
in a tiny way.
As always. Yes, well, we're all doing our little bit. Have a great weekend. We look forward to our conversation again next week.
Nice to be with you, Bill.
John Best, publisher of the Bay Observer, of course.